Me. Hi, welcome to Actual Spinster. Before I get into the video, there is a link in the description box to a GoFundMe to help Alla and her family whilst they're stuck in Gaza, which if you can check out, I would really appreciate it. Today's video is going to be a reading wrap up of the books I read in July, and yeah, the first book I read was a novella bind up. It's not like a modern available book, but yeah, it's this book by Catherine St. John Conway, or Catherine Bruce Glazier as she's most commonly known, that's her married name. And yeah, it's from like I want to say 1894, but I think her other book was from then, wasn't it? So anyway, it's from the 1890s. It's called Husband and Brother, and then also in the like physical book that I read of it, I mean, I scanned that book, but yeah, it also had a secondary thing, which was called something extremely long, called something like From Dominant to something, whatever. I'll like indicate. I read this for my PhD. It was interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to kind of writing about it and including it in the works that I look and think about, because I do feel like it's got some like interesting themes. I mean, it's about women's independence, which I suppose you could sort of tell from the title of the book, Husband and Brother, and it's also about love and yeah, I think also kind of about like reproduction and children or childhood or childcare, maybe more childcare than childhood, but in some kind of interesting ways. And I do also think that like Catherine St. John Conway's work, especially the two like 1890s novellas or whatever they are that I've read from her, are very like home social, like very interested in feeling between women in a really gay way, in my opinion. I mean, especially the other one that I read by her, which now of course I've forgotten the name of, but I talked about because I read it in October or like October last year, Amy Furness Scholar, and this one is, I would say, slightly less explicit in that sense because that's just so gay, like two women get married in it basically, but this one still has some of those same kinds of like really intense feeling and relationship between women, while still having space for like heterosexuality clearly, and like they're not trying to be like queer or anything, but I think they turn out to be, I guess. But yeah, so that was that. Then I read two plays that I did talk about in, well, a little bit I guess, in like a video about plays and specifically play texts that I made, because yeah, I briefly kind of got obsessed with plays there. The first one of these I read this month, or like last month now, was The Roaring Gull by Thomas Dekker and Thomas Middleton, which I thought was an interesting play. Specifically, yeah, I mean, I found, to be honest, I think the problem with comedies as plays is that often when you're reading them, the comedy does not feel very forward, and you have to kind of be like, okay, I guess on stage this is funny. And sometimes obviously that's also just not the case anymore, or at least like not to you, or like whatever, because contemporary thoughts about comedy have changed, and then sometimes they haven't, you know, like sometimes it's also kind of nice and enduring to be like, whoa, we found that funny also 500 years ago. But yeah, I mean, this is a play about Moll Cutpurse, who was a real person who cross-dressed and was like in trouble for it, and then they wrote this play where Moll Cutpurse is thought to be this like evil, degraded woman who's obviously a freak because she's cross-dressing, and in reality, you know, she actually has like a heart of gold basically. So it's, you know, a play about reality and inauthenticity and costume, and obviously as a play about gender on the stage, which is itself a very gendered place in the sense that all the characters would be played by like men and boys, and so when discussing women, especially women who are like non-conforming in some capacity, there's all of these dynamics at play. So yeah, I think like an interesting play to think about. I found the like paratext of this, like the introduction and stuff, not especially useful, but that's okay. Yeah, I don't know if that's fair. I guess I just feel like yeah, whatever. I did also listen to like a lecture about this by Emma Smith, which is available, which I talked about. Did I talk about it in the play video? I definitely talked about it last wrap-up video. It's called like Not Shakespeare, Jacobean and Elizabethan popular theatre, which I will leave a link to. It's a really great series and I would really recommend it. Yes, and then the other play was in this bind-up, and that's The White Devil that I read. I did like a combined read and listen in this case because I found a like radio play version to listen to. It was okay. I also found listening to the radio play was actually quite confusing at points, so it was kind of better when I was reading it. But yeah, it's a very violent play. It's you know, it's about revenge. Like, this is a bind-up of 4 revenge tragedies on purpose. Yeah, I don't know. I think I listened to a podcast about The Magicians of Caprona by Diana Wynne Jones. This will interlink, it just doesn't seem like it will. Where they were saying that partially The Magicians of Caprona is obviously inspired by Romeo and Juliet. That's very clear from the plot. It's like a book in the Chrestomanci series, and it's about 2 warring, like, antagonistic families with each other who are like both magic wielders. And you know, blah blah blah. But like, because it's focused on the children aren't Romeo and Juliet, but they are like embroiled in the like family dynamics and tension and blah blah blah. But anyway, this podcast I listened to talked about it being like a retelling of The White Devil, or at least it being like in conversation with that. So that was also what piqued my interest about it. But to be honest, I'm not really sure if that's true. I mean, I think I need to like think more about that, slash I guess listen more to that podcast and think about it as a case if I would agree. Because I really think the main text of those, like, obviously Romeo and Juliet's the big one with Magicians of Caprona, but also Punch and Judy is the other really big one. Which does mean that there are some pretty horrendous scenes. I mean, it's still like a kid's book, but it's pretty like scary at points and sinister, certainly. Anyway, that's not really about this. So yeah, these were the 2 plays that I read. I did also read 60% or so of The Tragedy of Mariam by Elizabeth Cary, but I DNF'd it. I just was bored. I really didn't like it. I also think that it was a closet drama, which is like a term that I don't know like super about, but it's basically, I'm pretty sure these weren't actually performed. I think they were more published and then read. But I could be wrong in that they may still have had some kind of performance history. But obviously, if you are writing a play and it doesn't have to be performed, like, you can do in the text things that maybe you wouldn't do so much if it's being performed, because you're like, this is too much speaking for one character. Or, yeah, I don't know, the way that, like, I think you could be less compelling, I guess, because you're just like, this is writing, as opposed to thinking about it as a performance and as, like, dialogue, which obviously a play is. When it's performed, it's majority dialogue. Like, what else is a play full of? From a language perspective, I guess. Anyway, but yeah, so I DNF'd that. I did also read the like introduction to that, and I also thought it was pretty bad. I think it was way worse than the Roaring Gull one, actually, because like for that one, they gave like a description of the author, but like I think I might have already talked about this somewhere, so I'm gonna stop myself. But yeah, needless to say, boring, and I stopped it. But I wanted to be on its side because it's like written by a woman, early modern play, and also like the main characters are like Jewish, and specifically this Jewish woman Mariam, so I was just really intrigued by that. But then I just found it so boring and dull, and like nothing interested me. Even though like it should have, because I'm interested in women, if that's not clear on this channel. The next thing I read was on my, I think The Tragedy of Mariam was also on my summer TBR actually, but the next thing I read was also on that, and that's The Lady of the Lake by Jean Mingus, which does feel like I read it a long time ago, to be honest, but I guess it wasn't that long ago. Yeah, I enjoyed this. It's not like it's a sort of historical fantasy, I guess, but it doesn't feel super historical in that sense. Like, it does kind of feel like you're in the psychology of like more, you know, modern people, which is fine. But yeah, no, I mean, I did enjoy it. I'm struggling to figure out what to say about it. I guess I am always like happy and want to be reading about like adult queer women and their relationships, because I think, well, it's just nice, isn't it? It is like a romance book, or like I think it's billed as like a romantasy, and I don't know that I've read, no, that's not true, I have read one Sarah J Maas many years ago. I do not support Sarah J Maas. But I have not read anything recently, I believe, that is like romantasy. I'm not a big like romance reader. I don't read romance, I guess, is more what I would say, even if like occasionally maybe I do make like forays into different reading. I think contemporary romance is often like a highly regulated genre and has a lot of like generic rules in a way that, yeah, it's not really something that I'm particularly looking for in books. But anyway, this wasn't the point. I guess I say that because this is maybe why I'm also kind of out of my depth and trying to talk about it. So yeah, I think Like, there were moments where some of the like intimate scenes were described that I didn't enjoy very much, which isn't to say like I don't really want to read about sex. I just think sometimes like I don't really want to read how people write about it. But yeah, I did think overall it was nice and I did enjoy this. And I definitely think that there's like a kind of reader out there who would really enjoy this. So I do hope that it is found by people who will, yeah, like love it. And you know, if you're looking for like witchcraft, magic, sorceress books, then it's a fun one in that sense. The next book I read was A Net for Small Fishes by Lucy Jago? I think it is Jago, which kind of is like, you know, from one book about queer women to another. I'm so sorry for being so like messy today. I'm obviously very tired, but I wanted to film this because it's the end of the month and I want to chat about my books, and then I also want to make a video about Women in Translation Month, but I think this should come out first, you know? Having read this now, it makes perfect sense why people were talking about it both as like a queer book and then also as a book that's like just about female friendship, because it's both of those things, but it does it in a, I would say, like fairly historically kind of constituted way, and in a way I really liked, and also in a way that isn't superficial but is also not explicitly like being gay, you know? Making any sense? I don't know. Okay, so this is set in like the Jacobean court, so it's set in the early 1600s when King James came to the throne, and that's hence Jacobean, following on from Elizabethan, but no longer a Tudor like Elizabeth, so it's also the start of like the Stuart era. Anyway, this doesn't really matter, I'm just saying it for clarity. So the main character of this story is Anne Turner, who is the wife of a doctor, and she's also sort of like a tailor seamstress, but she is sort of she's more like genteel than that, so she's not like a seamstress in that sense. She's almost more like a sort of designer to some degree. She also owns like a patent for yellow starch very specifically, which is kind of important in terms of the trends of the court and things like that. And she is like asked by a, like, I don't remember, like a countess, a lady, like whatever, like an upper class woman to go and help her daughter with her marriage basically, and like getting her dressed for this particular time period. She's already married, and that woman is Frances Howard, or Frankie, and so it's about the relationship that develops between Anne and Frankie. They're quite different women. They're like Anne is much older, or like 15, let's say, and Frances starts as like maybe 17, maybe there's only like 10 years between them, but either way they are still quite like different. And Anne Turner already has like 6 children when she meets Frances. It's about friendship, it's about loyalty, it's about love, and it's also about courts and performance. Yeah, like it's interesting, and I think I gave it like 4 stars ultimately. The ending made me just absolutely cry so much, but I did really enjoy it, and I think it's very clear in this novel, even though because it's trying to be kind of historically situated, like it doesn't try to kind of name that desire or make it into like something to be even like explored or discussed, but like the love between Frankie and Anne is extremely strong, and like there is obvious attraction too between them, especially like later on in their friendship there's like a scene where they like kiss, but because of the way that like desire moves between women and they live in such a patriarchal world, it's like just a part of their friendship, even if like I think that doesn't make it straight, if that makes sense. And yeah, and obviously, you know, there's also this like in tandem conversation, or like a more explicit discussion of like homosexuality specifically, because King James is this figure of like queerness basically. Like he had these like male favorites, and I mean, I'm sure he was sleeping with these men, and he also had a wife and had children and had a court and a public life as a king. Anyway, but he writes against things like sodomy, even as people sort of think that that's like what he's doing, you know? Yes, why did I say that? So yeah, like it's open to the possibility of queerness in this time period, and I really like this as a kind of like commitment to like representing the past without like needlessly overemphasizing sexuality, without like erasing the potential of queerness to be like alive and present in people's like bodies, minds, desires, hearts, like, which it obviously always has been. I gave this book to my mum actually before I had read it because I thought she would like it, and I'm pretty sure she really did, but I guess that just reminded me that I should maybe talk to her about it. The other thing that's like interesting also to me is that there's some kind of discussion about like the religious politics of the era, because Frances and Anne are both Catholics. They come from Catholic families, and to be a Catholic you experience a bunch of stuff. There's lots of talk of like the priest has been like dressed up as a, you know, I don't know, a page or like someone to deliver a message, so that they can come and say the like last rites or whatever they say. Is it extreme unction? Is that what priests do at the end? Anyway, there is some pretty intense misogyny and violence against women in this. It's maybe good to go easy, and also maybe to check the Storygraph content warnings if you would like. I can also try to tell you if you message me, I guess, but I do find it really a bit stressful to do that for other people, because I think we just all do have like different thresholds, and I guess I also just, I don't want to get it wrong and then like somebody reads something that they really don't want to and aren't prepared for, and if I had just said something differently they wouldn't have. This is in the Tudor period, but it's about, what, 7 years after it ended, so it's kind of still the same thing. Or maybe, you know, being like in a new age of maturity, I'm suddenly going to become obsessed with the Stuarts. That's not going to happen, but I did find it interesting. The next book I read was Potterism, a tragic farcical tract by Rose Macaulay. I did put another book from the 1920s on my summer TBR. I'm pretty sure I did that, and I think it was an Edith Wharton. But to be honest, I was looking at it and I was like, I really just don't feel in the mood for this. I still really wanted to read something from the 1920s, so I thought I would like swap it with this, which is a book that I got this year, which was from 1920. So the novel is about this family of like the children basically of this family who own like this major, you know, like a newspaper empire basically. They're called the Potters, but he's like Lord Pinkerton, I think is his name, and he's like, you know, the head of the house, the head of the newspapers, blah blah blah. We focus specifically on two twins, or like on twins in the family, not two pairs of twins, just two people who are twins, Jane and Johnny Potter. But I would say Jane, certainly as the novel proceeds, like is much more of a first character than anyone else. Primary character. What's the word for that? Main character. And it's about what they kind of call Potterism. So when Johnny and Jane go to university, they become friends with a group of people who like really, really hate the kind of ideological background behind the newspapers that their father produces. And more than that, like they hate the approach to truth. They hate the way that it teaches people to think about things. It's a very like broad sort of category, to the degree that I think it's pretty hard to define exactly. I mean, there's certainly a sense that it's like, you know, I mean, jingoism, that's Potterism, like sentimental, over-romantic stuff, Potterism, and also focusing on what you can get out of something rather than the process of doing something, or like art itself. That's Potterism. So yeah, so this is set in the like 1910s into 1920. Like it was published in maybe like March of 1920, but it is very like contemporary in that sense. It covers the First World War, and then it also focuses on the aftermath. And obviously when thinking about newspapers, war is like such a big thing, especially for the development of newspapers, and for the attention on newspapers. So that kind of dynamic is also at play. The way that the novel is told is kind of interesting, because, and I think it's, you know, it's definitely like self-conscious about like forms of writing and reporting specifically, because it starts by saying part 1 told by RM, which is obviously Rose Macaulay, but you know. Then part 2 is told by Gideon, who is a character, Arthur Gideon, who's one of the anti-Potterites. Then there's told by Layla York, who is the mother of Jane and Johnny, and so the wife of Lord Pinkerton as well. Then told by Catherine Varrett, who is a friend of Jane and Johnny. Then there's told by Duke, who is like a clergyman, can't remember exactly what he is. But this is told by Duke in his private journal, so it's a different form of writing, or like supposedly. I don't know that these sections feel totally distinct. The Layla York one does, but not so much in the writing style, but just in the like preoccupations of the character. And then the last section is told by RM again. And it's definitely like trying to be funny, and it's also definitely trying to explore anti-Semitism. The character Gideon, he is Jewish. His father has become like assimilated and like a naturalized British person, like so changed his last name to be like Sydney. I think he took his wife's name or something so that like his Russian Jewish like ancestry would be, you know, like covered up. And so he wanted to raise his children like they weren't Jews at all. But then Gideon went back to the surname that like his father left behind him and was trying to move away from. And his father did leave Russia due to pogroms as a child. And so there's an exploration of the way that the press like can really like galvanize and feeds on like anti-Semitism. There's a lot of antagonism towards Gideon. I mean, he's quite an antagonistic person. Like I said, he hates like the Potterite press. He's, you know, in the anti-Potter League, which Jane and Johnny are too. And he also like develops his own newspaper called The Weekly Fact. But yeah, there's also like a sort of level of, what's the word, not attrition, but just like futility to like Gideon's attempts, and like anyone basically who attempts to fight against Potterism. I don't want to spoil the end of the book, but I do also feel like the introduction to this is really trying hard to say that all of the instances of anti-Semitism in the text, both narratively and like spoken by characters, that they are all a part of Rose Macaulay's like attempt to show that like anti-Semitism is bad and stupid. And I think some of those statements are definitely true, but I do also think that this novel has a real problem with the idea of like Jewish continuity and like Jewish babies. There are characters who explicitly are very against the idea of like their children having Jewish babies, but then because of the way this novel ends, it just feels like, so does Rose Macaulay. I feel like it's more like maybe Rose Macaulay can't actually fathom a world where Jewish babies are okay to exist and do. Yeah, I don't want to spoil this, like I said, so I guess I can't say very much more. But yeah, this was really interesting to read as like a historical document. And also what was interesting is I've never really thought about like the direct aftermath of the First World War and like the actual like material creation of a peace treaty. Because like all of the newspapers, like giants, you know, they go to Paris to follow along with the peace treaties that are being made in 1919 in Paris. And so that's like Jane goes with her father and stuff and like is secretary to him and blah blah blah. And I'd really never thought about that as a real like concrete moment of time between the end of the war and like having made these treaties and like calcified peace into something, which I thought was really interesting. Sorry, I feel like I'm going on, but I don't know. This book was really interesting to me, and I also found it like fairly like easy to read. And so I do really want to read more Rose Macaulay, and she like wrote quite a lot of things. And I do already have this on my bookshelf, which is Dangerous Ages, so I'm hoping to read that soon. And then I did also get another Rose Macaulay book, but it's coming to me. And that's Non-Combatants and Other Writing, I think. But I actually really want to read Whatnot by her, but because it was published by the same press, Handheld Press, and they no longer are like running, and it's not in their like remaindered stock that you can buy, which is where I bought this from. I don't know how I'm gonna get that, and I'm not paying £20 for it because that's too much money. But yeah, I mean, hoping to read this, but that's, yeah, we'll move on now. Then the last book I read was this book, which is Miss Nobody by Ethel Carney. And this book was like really interesting. I think especially in terms of romance, which is kind of ironic but considering I just struggled to talk about like a romantic-y book. But yeah, so this is from 1913, so it's yeah, but I do think it's having a really interesting conversation about romance, because the character in this, she reads like these novelettes that are these like, you know, sensational romantic whatever, and she describes her own feelings as being very different from the characters, which means she can't be in love. I think there's just, yeah, some like interesting stuff going on. So this book is about this working class woman, independent Carrie Brown, who was previously like who was previously in service, like as a scullery worker. I don't really want to call her a scullery drudge, which the back does, but And I think in the book she is called that sometimes by other people, but then she becomes like an oyster shop owner, and she goes to visit her sister, who does not live in Manchester. She lives in Manchester. Her sister lives in somewhere called like Greenmeads. And when she goes to visit, she like has this interaction with a farmer called Farmer Gibson, or Robert Gibson is his name. And from that encounter, he takes a liking to her and then seeks her out, and they do get married. And that's not like a spoiler, I think it's clear it's going to happen, but it does happen like fairly early on, and then there's a bunch of plot. So it's definitely not like a romance or a romantic story where it's like, and then the heroine and the hero got together. It takes a while for it to become legible in the romance capacity. I think I'm doing really badly talking about this. But yeah, Ethel Carney is a really interesting author. She was like an anti-fascist and a socialist campaigner, and also working class, which is fairly uncommon for a lot of the fiction that I look at by socialist women, which, I mean, hopefully more working class socialist women's writing will be like discovered and focused on, but it's partially due to the fact that like working class, you know, socialist women have more obstacles in the way of them writing things, so that tends to be why there's less women. And then also because, yeah, women who are middle class have more time as well to like dedicate, just in general. The back of this says widely believed to be the first published novel written by a working class woman in Britain, and I don't really buy that, and I also really don't like the framing of that, to be honest. But it's certainly great that it's a working class woman writing it, and there is this like very particular time period where Carrie is working at I can't actually remember what they produce, but at a factory, some kind of textile work, I think, and the way it's written is really beautiful and so powerful, I thought, in how it represented working class women's lives, their intimacies, their struggles. There is like unionization stuff that happens, they go on strike. I just thought it was really beautifully done, and it almost did feel quite like distinct and almost like the heart of the novel, where the rest of it is a bit different, and also certainly very different in a kind of framework. I mean, like, Carrie becomes the wife of a farmer, so she lives in the country, and the factory is, you know, in Manchester, in the city, with all of these women working close together and living by their sides. I think on Goodreads I gave it like 4 stars. I don't think it's like really a 4-star book, but for me, I just found it like a really fascinating book to read, and I definitely would recommend it, like, if it's like really sounds interesting. It's great to read about working class women in the past, and especially from the perspective of a working class woman. I mean, some stuff around disability, I would say, is where this like definitely falls short, but aside from that, I think that she imbues the working class characters in this with like a level of autonomy, or at least, obviously they are still like impacted by their material circumstances, but I think in lots of other portrayals of working class people and working class life, there's a very, very particular focus on their like plight and on their victimhood, as opposed to their capacity to help each other and make change and be in solidarity. And like that's more what I think comes to the fore in this. Really glad to have read it, and really looking forward to trying to read maybe more of her fiction. I'm not sure if she actually did write that much more fiction, but I think she did. I think she maybe wrote some more romancy books. It looks like there's another novel called This Slavery from 1925, which immediately kind of puts me off, but I would still potentially read it because it might be interesting too. Okay, I'm very hot. I think I'm finally done, so I can finally be quiet. But definitely let me know if you've read any of these books, or if you're interested in reading any of them. Have I been at all persuasive about people reading Miss Nobody? Have I? I kind of doubt it. And also, if you don't like it, don't blame me, but also kind of interesting. Apparently she wrote 10 novels. That's what it says on the back, which I guess I should have read all the way through, but I probably did just a while ago. Anyway, that is everything I had to talk about in this wrap up. I'm pretty sure. If I miss something, I'll have to talk about it in the next one. Like, we're moving on. Thank you so much for your time, and yes, I hope you are doing okay when you're watching this, and I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye.